Welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining this webinar today. This is the first webinar out of a series, which is titled Exploring Modernisms. My name is Mira Hirtz and I'm curating this webinar series and also moderating today. I'm as well the co-curator of the project that this webinar is part of, and I'm gonna say a little bit more about that in a moment. But before that, a really heartfelt welcome to the speakers and the discussants that we have here today, which I will also introduce in a little bit, which are Raju Sutar, Marianne Keller-Chirin, and Karen Sitzowitz. And yes, we're gonna introduce them in a moment. Before we go into that and deeper into the content, I just want to say a few housekeeping practical things. There are automated captions available. You can turn them on if you would like to. This webinar is recorded. So that means if you are for some reason not able to stay for the whole time, or you would like to watch it back or spread the word, which we love, you can find the recording then in a few weeks' time on the YouTube channel of the Goethe-Institut Pune. And very important, if you have questions or comments at any time, please put them into the chat and I will collect them, and we have allocated time at the end of the webinar to then address them and go through them. So please feel free. What I also wanted to say is that approximately halfway through, we're gonna have a short break, and the webinar in total will last approximately 2 hours or 2.5 hours. Let me look at my notes. Okay, yes, so I want to say some more about the project in general that this webinar series is part of. It's titled Intersections and Interventions, Barwe and Klee, and it has been running since 2023, so since last year, as a collaboration between the Goethe-Institut, Max Müller-Barwe Pune, the Sapursa Museum of Art and Culture, Pune, both of these are based in India, and the Zentrum Paul Klee in Bern, Switzerland. And this project wants to bring two artists and their artistic practice, but also their theoretical and pedagogical ideas into a dialogue. And these two artists are, as mentioned, Prabhakar Barwe, who lived from 1936 till 1995. And we could say that he was a painter of the second wave of Indian modernism based in Maharashtra in India. And the other artist is Barwe Klee, who lived from 1879 till 1940, so earlier than Barwe. And he was a Swiss-German modernist painter and teacher at the Bauhaus School in the 1920s in Germany. And this idea for the dialogue of bringing these two artists into a dialogue draws from the fact that in the second half of the last century, Klee's work was introduced to various Indian art schools and audiences, especially also to the region of Maharashtra where Barwe lived, and to Barwe himself, and served as a source for inspiration. And the project wants to explore this connection, this inspiration, and what exactly that was or that meant, and what kind of affinities or differences we can find between Barwe's and Klee's work, but also between their respective cultural and national contexts, their respective art schools, and Indian and German modernism in general. So we have a lot of goals and aims with this project. By emphasizing shared artistic languages and differences, as I said, in the respective cultural and national contexts, and by framing modernism as a global phenomena, we would like to challenge with this project stories of singular influence, and I'm going to come back to what I mean with that in a moment. I also wanted to mention that we started this whole project with a translation project, translating writings of Barwe into German and of Klee into Marathi. This has never been done before, so this is a super exciting project for us. We did this together with Diamantenschliff, who is a group of translators based in India, and these translations will also be available online on our website very soon, so stay tuned for that. And these translations tie into a diverse program of this year and also next year of events and workshops and exhibitions, both in Pune, in Maharashtra, locally, as well as internationally, like this webinar series. And all of this is going to lead to an exhibition of Barwe's and Klee's works in September 25 next year at the Saposa Museum of Art and Culture, Pune. And we are very excited about this already. I'm going to say a few more words about this webinar series in particular that we're kicking off today. With this webinar series, we're aiming to enable international dialogues, and this webinar is a perfect example of that, with speakers coming from India, Switzerland, and the US. And we want to tap into concepts of art history, modernism, abstractionism in a global sense. We want to think here about the tension that one might come up against when thinking about modernism in a global way, which is to ask if modern art subverted dominant ideas. Did it go against the grain? Was it a place of rebellion, redefining art, seeking freedom? Or was modern art rather the source of potentially still today dominating narratives? And that's what I pointed to with narratives of singular influence, such as that modernisms in Europe and the US are seen as, so to speak, the main modernisms, against which all the other modernisms across the world are compared and then end up as mere copies. And this is a tension that we want to look at in this webinar series. And today, with this webinar, we I guess also want to give a base upon which to raise these wide questions by introducing the artists and their work a little bit more. And this webinar is titled No Form, ? Abstraction in Prabhakar Barwe's and Paul Klee's work. And now I would love to introduce the speakers a little bit more. So if we could see all of us together now, that would be really great. Raju Sutar, if we can spotlight Raju Sutar as well, is both an artist and a curator. He has gained recognition for his work internationally and nationally. As a member of the Saposa team, he contributes as a curator and also co-curates this project together with me, which I'm very happy about. And as an artist, he specializes in contemporary art, focusing on large-scale paintings, sheet metal installations, photography, and video. And he's joining us from India today. Mariana Keller-Chirren initially studied music before taking up a degree in art history, German studies, and history at the University of Bern in 2002. As part of a 3-year research project on Paul Klee's teaching at the Bauhaus, and she's also going to grant us some insight into that today, she completed her doctorate with a thesis on Paul Klee's theory of color. After several years working in cultural promotion, she has been the head of the archive, library and research department at the Zentrum Paul Klee since the beginning of 2022, and as such has been an absolutely huge support for this project. Karen Sitzewitz, oh yes, and of course, Marianne is joining us from Switzerland today. And last but not least, Karen Sitzewitz, who is joining us from the US, is a professor and chair of the Department of Art History and Archaeology at the University of Maryland. She is the author of the book Infrastructure and Form, The Global Networks of Indian Contemporary Art, 1991 to 2008, and The Art of Secularism, The Cultural Politics of Modernist Art in Contemporary India. Her research has been supported by the European Research Council, the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation, the American Institute for Indian Studies, and the Fulbright Program. And with all of that expertise, she will join the discussion today. And just to mention that I myself, not belonging to any of these institutions, but an independent curator and artist, and as mentioned, I'm co-creating this project together with Raju. And now I would like to first invite Raju and then Marianne to both present a little more about the artist and also the partner institutions. Then we will have a short break, as mentioned, and continue the discussion joined by Karen. And as mentioned, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free at any moment to just put them into the chat, and then I will collect them and come back to them. Raju, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. This is the first of the series which we are launching today. Um, okay, I'll start with a presentation. Uh, okay, so this is about the museum located in India and Pune, Zapurza Museum of Art and Culture. Mm, Basically, we are a very young museum. We just started on 19th of May 2022, and this place is around 7 acres, little away from the city, surrounded by nature and backwater of a dam, a Khadakosla Dam. So, if you happen to be here, please visit our website, which is zapurza.org, and find ourselves. So Zapurza, the name Zapurza is coming from a poem, which is a very famous poem by a poet, a legendary poet in Marathi, Keshav Sut, uh, who has actually coined this word, Zapurza, for a state of mind which an artist leads to when he is creating something. So there are so many verses in this poem which he has explained how that Zapurza moment is seen. So this, I think we all have thought the founder and Mr. Dilip Joshi, our colleague, and we all thought that this is the correct name for the museum because we also would like to try and give this experience to the viewer. So the name comes from this poem. He is Mr. Ajit Gargar is a founder and is a avid collector. He started collecting stuff since last 25 years. And then I and Mr. Dilip Joshi joined him in 2012, and then we started shaping up this museum. The collection also was collected in a certain way to present things in a way. And the idea and the focus was how this museum can become a learning resource for the people. And the idea of our founder was to share things which he holds. He always wanted to show this to the people, and I think he also wanted it to invest in the next generation. I think to present everything objectively, whatever we have, and complete like open source to people, and that was his idea, and that culminated into this museum, and we started this just very recently. So this is little away from the city, which you'll find it on the map, and you can see this blue thing, which is a backwater of a dam. We also have a full-fledged auditorium, state-of-the-art auditorium. We have an amphitheater having this water as a backdrop. There are residencies, and apart from that, we have a pottery studio, we have a printmaking studio, conference halls, and there are so many spaces where the activity happens. So we have 10 galleries. We are exhibiting different collections from in the different galleries. There's a jewelry gallery, there's a art collection, there is a very nice collection of textiles we have, and the collection actually varies from the collection of matchboxes to the modern and contemporary art. So it's a very vivid and wide range collection, and it's a very like a dream for a curator to go through it and display this. So there are a few galleries which I'm just showing you to. We also have a lot of interactions because I think this was much needed in the city. As we are also known, the city is also, the Pune city is also known as a city of culture, and the art and the contemporary art was missing. So we conduct a lot of curatorial walks and we try to engage people in these talks. And we have interesting nature, and there's a place where kids can spend a day, and that's how it is designed. We have a lot of activities for kids. We have hands-on things for everyone too. And this is the address. Yeah. So I'll just move to my core thing today is about Prabhakar Barwe. So Prabhakar Barwe is a very prominent name in the second wave of modernists in India, and he has his own way of dealing with visuals and spaces. I happened to meet him when I was a student, and we had a considerable dialogue, and which was very important for me in my shaping days. And I'm just going to show you the things, the collection which we have at the museum of his works. So, a little brief about Barwe sir. I used to call him Barwe sir. He was born in Nagaon near Alibag, which is a coastal area, western coastal area in India. And it's, it is said that his father was also a sculptor, and his grand uncle, Mr. Karmarkar, was a very celebrated sculptor in India. And I think he had suggested that Prabhakar Barwe should join JJ School of Art, and then he joined JJ School of Art in 1954. And then after the diploma, immediately in think in 1961, he joined Weavers Center, and he was exposed to this city, a very interesting spiritual city of Banaras, where he encountered a lot of ritualistic and tantric things, and all those forms and all those visuals were incorporated. And in his early days, he was also very much influenced by the way Paul Klee was dealing with the spaces. And Paul Klee was introduced in JJ School of Art by a great artist, Shankar Parshikar. And also with him, Shankar Parshikar also introduced philosophers like J. Krishnamurti, and there was a series of talk in JJ School of Art by him. So there are several things which have influenced him throughout. And then he was also a very prolific and a avid writer, and he used to keep a diary. And just like Paul Klee, he had written so many things about his process. And there's a book called Cora Canvas, which he himself has compiled of his writing and also illustrated, which became a kind of a handbook for every student from the art school to deal with all the ordeals, all the problems which we all face as a student. So this book is a very popular one, and we had translated some portions, some chapters from this book into German. And yeah, so this is one of the works which is done for the Weavers Center. He was working at Weavers Center and was also involved in designing, and also was actually meeting the craftsmen and craft people. And he tried to incorporate those traditional designs in a modern contemporary way. This is a little residue of his tantric idea. The tantric idea, the tantra is basically there are three type of approaches in tantric way. This is a little ritual which is to about reaching to the unknown, to the supreme, to get enlightened. So tantra is basically translated into technique, literally. So in this we have two, three ways. Like Tantra has the tantric ways where there are exercises and so many things. The other thing is yantra, which is also can be translated as machine, but these are diagrams, which you can see there are geometrical things and things which are done in a particular way. And then the other one is mantra. Mantra is about the chanting of words and getting the mental power uh, imbibed into that. So the the tantric way, which is seen by the neo-tantrics in Indian modernism, was the geometry and the forms which are uh, mystically presented in this ritual. Are these artists have encountered those, and they have tried to uh, reconstruct and redefine those forms in a different way. So this is another work which is he is also was very experimental in his technique. So he used to use the industrial paints with the oil colors. So he has evolved a completely different style of his own by using these industrial paints. And this is basically he used for the different textures which he wanted to achieve for the different spaces. So this is another work which is a fabric work. This is painted on fabric. Uh, again, coming from the viewer's center influence. This is some of his abstracts. Here you can see some influence of Paul Klee. This is another from the viewer's center. These are the drawings which he used to engage himself daily, and some of those are in our collection. You can see some interesting animated story in this. So here, when we talk about abstraction, and especially I wanted to talk to you about a concept which is called amurta. Amurta in Indian Hindi or Sanskrit is no form. No form technically is not possible because even if you think there's a form, you call it a thought form. So what is no form? So there was a movement in Indian continent which was between 7th and 17th century. So it was called Bhakti movement, where the mystics were trying to connect with the Supreme and also were trying to deal with the religious idea of idols and gods. So the story of duality, like there's a if you all see God and you as a different creatures, but or any creature is in a different way, but it is very much parallel to the idea of quantum physics, which also says the idea of unified field, which also says that we are all one. So this idea was very prevalent in these 10 centuries, and this idea is still there in popular Indian belief. And I think what Barwe and others have tried to do, especially Barwe, is uh, to have this idea of a form and strip its identity completely and reconstruct, relocate, and find a different way. So while I remember a dialogue when we were talking about abstraction. So he was saying that the idea of abstraction should also be abstract. It cannot be concrete. So he also always used to say that maybe a ball of clay is not a pot. If you incorporate space inside, it becomes a box. It becomes a pot. So he was interested in the idea of inside space, outside space, space surrounded by you, and space within, and the mental space. So the abstract idea of abstraction and form and formlessness was very fluid. in Prabhakar Barwe's approach. And I think he was kind of a moderate in his approach, not going extreme towards the figure and extreme towards the uh, abstraction. You can see the scale. He also played a lot with the scale. And his work is also very kind of a biographical. Whatever used to come to his studio, like even the fruits and vegetables, they first used to go to his table and then he used to sketch it, and then it is to go to the kitchen. So everything what he has painted was from the surrounding, from his life. This is what he used to always talk about, the space inside and space outside. And he always visualized a box and the space inside the box and the outside the box and the compartmentalization of it and the entire space as one space. So he actually has stripped the objects with the identity, and he has presented it in a very objective way, like this philosopher J. Krishnamurti always used to talk about being an observer. So I think his idea of abstraction was to become an observer, and that is how he has tried to deal with his space. This is a very few sculptures he has done. This is one of the sculptures in our collection, which is of wood. And yes, that's the collection we have. So yeah, the idea of no form is actually not uh, realistically saying that there is no form, but to strip the identity, strip the physicality, the material, and look beyond. What I think that was he was trying to deal with that idea, and the abstraction uh, in a way which we pursue is not, I think, considered by him. So I think we can open this for discussions after the session more, because it's very difficult to explain his idea in a very for a shorter time. Uh, but I think we can open this for discussion, and we can have a nice discussion about this. Yes, Ray. Yes, Mira.
Thank you so much, Raju, for the presentation and the insights into Barwe's work, and also great to see your collection that you have,
Yeah.
and that if if you're around in Pune, you will be able to see that next year in total.
Yes.
Um, yes, we can, let's keep all burning comments and questions or
Yeah.
put them into the chat. And I would love to just directly hand over to Marianne and give her the floor.
Yeah.
Very much. Mira, thank you, Raju, for this presentation on Prabhakar Barwe. Very interesting also for me. Yeah, we are also a young museum, even if Paul Klee died in 1940, but the Zentrum Paul Klee in Switzerland opened in 2005. So we are almost 20 years old, and we host around 4,000 works by Paul Klee from out of 10,000 he left, he made during his lifetime, his rather short lifetime. And so we have a huge collection, but because Paul Klee preferred to work on paper, almost 80% of his work is paperwork, and 80% of our collection is paperwork. So whenever you happen to come to Switzerland and to visit the Centrum Paul Klee, and you would like to see the big paintings, then you might be a little bit disappointed because they are mostly in the US, New York, they are in Berlin, and not so many here. But still, it's worth visiting us and see all these very nice works. As Mira already told you, I will mainly speak about Paul Klee's work as a teacher, as a lecturer at the Bauhaus School in Germany, because I think it gives you some good insight in his ideas of form, of becoming, of shaping, which you can later discover on your own in the artworks, but I think it gives you a big understanding. And what I also would like to point out before sharing my presentation with you is that Paul Klee was known besides his artworks, but all his writings were spread into the world in the second half of the 20th century via a publication called in German Das Bildnerische Denken, and in English it was The Thinking Eye. And artists and scholars who discovered these writings, they thought, wow, that's the theory of Paul Klee. It is partly, but it's a compilation made by an art historian with the name Jürg Spiller. And the problem about this publication is that he compiled it quite freely. So it's a kind of interpretation Spiller made upon Klee's thinking and works. And it's not always put together the way we now know that Klee intended it to be. But nevertheless, it's a very important source because that's how artists, scholars all over the world were able to discover Paul Klee's thinking and writing. But just to point out at the beginning that, we have the original sources here and they are also online, since a couple of years. So if you're interested in these issues, you should be able to see them. But now I would like to start with my presentation. If Paul Klee's thinking and work had to be summarized under one term, then movement would probably be the most apt. Klee considered movement as the foundation of Gestaltung, and Gestaltung is a rather difficult word to translate in English. It means design, art, but also pictorial practice in general. And in one of his rare essays about his own artistic practice in the Creative Confessions, Klee stated in 1920, Bewegung liegt allem Werden zugrunde. Movement is the source of all change. The ideas about the creative process, which he expressed in the Creative Confessions, also formed the basis of his teaching at the Bauhaus and was the result of his artistic becoming. He emphasized the pictorial process over the result. He called for the lebendige Gestaltung, a living or living configuration, art design, and this could only be achieved by movement. Paul Klee came to this realization during the years of his artistic self-discovery. As diary entries and letters show, during his educational trip to Italy in winter 1901 and 1902, and in the following months he studied Goethe, in particular his theory of metamorphosis and the writings of the German Romantic writer Friedrich Hebel. He wanted to create his works organically like nature. The work of art is Genesis and relates to creation like a parable. Such ideas were honestly very common in the first decades of the 20th century in Europe. What was special about Klee, however, in my opinion, was the fact that he also applied these insights to the creation of pictorial elements and geometric forms. That's why I will be talking mostly about his teaching today. His form lessons at the Bauhaus, where designers and architects were trained, not artists, were entirely focused on the aspect of movement. And you will find this aspect all over his work too. But first, I would like to tell you something about Paul Klee. As Mira already mentioned, he was born in 1879 and grew up in the Swiss capital, Bern. His father was a music teacher, his mother a singer, and as a child he learned to play the violin and was apparently so gifted that he even considered studying music. In the end, he decided on painting and moved to Munich for his studies. There he met the pianist Lili Stumpf, whom he married in 1906. And 1 year later, then their son Felix was born and the family settled in Munich. Lili Klee earned the family living with piano lessons. Paul stayed at home and looked after his son. He always painted as well, but it was only during the First World War that he became really successful. Two of his friends, the well-known German artists Franz Marc and August Macke, had died at the very beginning of the war, and Klee's poetic and fine works were highly appreciated by art lovers. Thus, after the war in 1919, he was a recognized personality and was appointed as a teacher at the Bauhaus. In 1930, he was at the height of his success and left the Bauhaus to go to the Düsseldorf Art Academy. Only 2.5 years later, after the National Socialists seized power, he was immediately dismissed. His art was considered degenerate, and he was accused of having a Jewish family background. At the end of this year, in end of 1933, Paul Klee and his wife emigrated to Switzerland, where his father and sister still lived. In 1936, he became seriously ill and could hardly work anymore. And in 1940, at the age of only 60, he died of cardiac paralysis. Because Paul Klee's father was German citizen, also Paul Klee never had the Swiss citizenship. He applied for it when he came back in 1934, but due to some legal aspects, he wouldn't grant it the citizenship, and so he died as German as he was born in Switzerland. But still we consider him as a Swiss artist. But now let's go back to his employment at the Bauhaus. There the training took place in two parts. All students first had to complete the basic or preliminary apprenticeship during 1 semester, which included a course in design theory in addition to practical work in the so-called preliminary course. This course was almost taught continuously by Paul Klee. After the 6-month basic apprenticeship, students were accepted into a workshop of their choice. The teachers, or masters, as they were also called, were free to organize their lessons as they wished. There was no actual official curriculum at this time. The practical part of the basic training was about finding a form of expression that emphasized the specific characteristics of the material in question. The preliminary course is essentially the element of the Bauhaus curriculum that was established in art school during art school education throughout the 20th century. At the left hand here, you have a little insight of the studio of Paul Klee in Weimar in 1924. And on the right-hand side, you have an insight in the carpenter workshop, where also Felix Klee joined the classes and made an apprenticeship as a carpenter. He later became, what is it called, an opera. Yeah, he worked later also in the art fields, not as a carpenter. The theoretical teaching of form was even expanded in Dessau. The compulsory subjects in the first semester included 2 classes by Wassily Kandinsky from 1926, while Klee's lecture on the primary design of surface was obligatory in the second semester. Interestingly, throughout the entire existence of the Bauhaus, nude drawing was also an integral part of the curriculum, and the desire for a free painting class was repeatedly expressed, especially in Dessau. And here another impression of this Bauhaus surroundings in the 1920s in Dessau. On the left-hand side, you see the so-called master houses of Paul Klee and Wassily Kandinsky. And on the right-hand side, inside the studio of Paul Klee, in this part, probably, of this house. So, what exactly did Paul Klee's formal teaching look like? He began his teaching activities in May 1921 with a fortnightly composition practicum. In this class, he used his own works to go into detail about picture composition and the individual elements of picture design. It was not until the second semester that he had developed a class in bildnerischer Formlehre, which we would translate with theory of pictorial form. He prepared himself for these lessons by writing everything down in a small book and reading the text during the lessons. The fact that he did not feel entirely comfortable in this role at the beginning is evident from a statement made by his fellow teacher, Georg Muche. Quote, "In the first lesson Klee gave at the Bauhaus, he came through the door with his back turned. Without looking at the audience, he immediately turned to the blackboard and began to speak and draw." End quote. The main intention of Klee's Bauhaus teaching was to convey to students the processual nature of artistic design. In a lecture in January 1924, he summarized his elementary teaching of creativity in a programmatic appeal. I quote again, and you can also read it on the screen. "Good is form as movement, as doing. Good is active form. Bad is form as rest, as end. Bad is suffered, achieved form. Good is forming. Bad is form. Form is end, is death. Shaping is movement, is action. Shaping is life." For this reason, Paul Klee changed the title of his teaching notes from Bildnerische Formlehre, Theory of Pictorial Form, to Bildnerische Gestaltungslehre, which we would translate with Theory of Pictorial Configuration. And he justified this change, I quote again, "It is the doctrine of form, but with an emphasis of the path leading to it. The word Gestaltung, design, characterizes what has just been said through its ending." Klee focused on making these paths as dynamic as possible. His emphasis on movement, which leads to the pictorial elements and forms, is the decisive contribution of his design theory. The line is created, for example, by the movement of a point that is already energized in itself. That means it carries a potential energy. The displacement of the line creates a surface, and its movement in space creates this three-dimensional body. And I think it's one of the differences between Wassily Kandinsky's art theory, because also Kandinsky starts with the point, of course, but for Kandinsky, this point needs to have an external impulse to start moving. And Klee's point has this potential energy in itself and can start moving from itself. During his 10 years of teaching career, Klee wrote about 4,000 pages of lectures, drawings, sketches. And in the research project more than 10 years ago, we were able to study the whole material and to organize it as Paul Klee had supposedly intended to, because around 1928, he had noted the table of contents for the teaching material. And it's structured in 24 chapters, and all material is now online under this link, kleegestaltungslehre.zpk.org, where you can browse the material and you have some introduction for every chapter. well, although only in German, and it's probably not the most sophisticated website anymore, but still it's possible to see the whole material. And on this table of content, you can see that planimetric configuration takes up a great deal of space in his teaching. It's from chapter 5 to chapter 23. It's all about planimetric design. And this emphasis probably came only with the move to Dessau, which is an indication that the school's orientation changed from 1925 onwards. Functionality and architecture became increasingly important, while free design and the philosophical and esoteric ideas of the founding years became less significant. Naturally, the theoretical teaching also had to be adapted to this change. And when looking through the 3,000 or so sheets on planimetric and also stereometric configuration, we wondered more than once how pupils had coped with this content. Subsequent comments show that they often hardly understood anything during the training period, and it was only much later that the light literally dawned on them and they realized exactly what Klee had been trying to teach them at the time. In the following, I would like to use a few examples to explain how Klee taught the various creative principles and the importance of the aspect of movement in them. And I will start with his teaching in color, basically the most abstract tool to work with. He started his lecture in colors in winter 1922, explaining what he wanted to do. And I quote again, "I will try to tell you a few useful things about colors. I base my remarks not just on my own thoughts, but take up the thoughts of experts and others without hesitation in order to transmit these useful things to you. To cite a few names, I mention Goethe, Philipp Otterunge, whose Color Sphere was published in 1810, Delacroix, and Kandinsky, The Spiritual of Art." And using the color circle and the color triangle, Klee explained the basic principle of the color order, drawing largely on the teachings of Goethe and Runge. Using the example of diametrical color pairs, he discussed the complementary contrast and showed how gray is created when these colors are applied on top of each other in a glazing manner. He then turned his attention to the color movements on the circle and explained which colors can be mixed by glazing from the adjacent primary colors red, yellow, and blue. As an image for the character traits of the main colors, he developed the canon of totality. And I think that's an interesting sketch he made here, because he pointed out that the primary colors, red, yellow, and blue, there's only one single spot where they're completely pure. And as soon as you start lightening them up or darkening them, it's fading out. So it's only one point red. And if you turn right, then it's very soon already a little glimpse of yellow in his color. And if you fade out yellow, there's already very soon a very light hint of blue in. And you can also see in this sketch that with the circling, with this canon, the musical metaphor of canon, he emphasizes the movement in this whole color appliance. In the winter semester in 1923 and 4, after he had once again explained the color circle and the triangle and had drawn on the explanation already made, he started analyzing the color movement in the sphere, referring to this color sphere by Philipp Otterunge. And also here you can see clearly that it was the movement in the sphere that was important for him. For example, when he explained to people that if they use blue and they would lighten it up with white on the top, then the complementary orange has to get a little bit darker in order to achieve a balance in this color mixture. As an example, for this artistic approach to the movement of color, I would like to show you these two works. the earlier work from 1924 at the left, in this work, Klee used the central mirroring technique for applying colors, but he painted the squares quite freely. And 3 years later, in 1927, he relies on more or less exact the same pattern, also centrally mirroring, but the painting in size is a bit bigger, from 28 to 41 centimeters, and with more or less rectangular squares. And I think it's interesting to see how he would apply both things, but you get a complete different view on this same pattern if it's painted freely and lightly, or if it's painted like on the left-hand side with this clear rectangular spaces. While Klee stated that movement was the basis of every design, he demanded also conscious choice of the direction of movement for a concrete pictorial design. It was not arbitrary, but should follow the law of the inner necessity. And as the direction of movement was of central importance for the design, Klee explored the question of how this could be organized in class. I quote again, "Symbolically, the arrow reigns here, but this symbol is only a generally reached and valid agreement and may find its place in an art that works with symbols. But the symbol is not in itself an artistic creation. This symbol must be overcome. It must work without an arrow." And looking at some of Klee's works, this statement may come as a surprise, because as you can see on these two examples, he himself would use sometimes arrows to show a direction. But it's also an example to show that you can't, that Klee's art and his teaching shouldn't be treated in the same way. And I will come back to this issue later. In Klee's understanding, the arrow also symbolizes abstract forces that characterize balances, like here is this watercolor Unstable Equilibrium from 1922. For Klee, equilibrium is always unstable. It is always a nascent equilibrium that is established through movement and counter-movement, and which can be destroyed or at least disturbed again at any time. So to reach equilibrium, you need to balance permanently. In addition to such artistic realizations of movement, Klee was also concerned with the psychological implication of mobility. In his lecture on pictorial mechanics, he stated, I quote, "Movement is in truth the norm, and if movement is in truth the norm, then dynamism is also the norm," end quote. He differentiated between inhibited movement in the static area, like here on the right-hand side, and free movement in the dynamic area. He named the rectilinear path as the original form of free movement. This line here. The first phase, motion is free, is uninhibited, is uninfluenced natural motion, just as the world bodies move in space. These take part in general mobility without any personal activity. They obey the primordial law. This linear primal motion can be transformed into a curve by an attractive force. That's what he meant with this drawing. Klee characterized this as influenced movement. If an energetic center gains more power and its own movement has to be abandoned, Klee spoke of the inhibited movement. Man, for example, who is bound to Earth by gravity, can only move in an inhibited way. He can try to overcome this restraint through muscle power, for example, by jumping, or, as Klee would mention it, through the inventions of the minds, for example, aeroplanes. Analog to the plant, which keeps its balance with side shoots and branches, man balances the equilibrium with his arms. Chapter fast forward, chapter 5, metric design. This chapter describes the genesis of geometric forms such as the triangle and notes in brackets as genesis, the triangle as genesis. In this chapter, he introduces the new concept of tension. Movement stems from force and the tension between two poles. For example, a triangle is created by the movement of a perpendicular and the tension from point to line. Based on this observation, he applied the prevailing forces in the geometric field. He drew the facet, and I quote again, "Purely static things cannot be turned. Purely dynamic things can be rotated. Triangles and squares suffer from movement. They are not indifferent to motion. That means they are not inherently mobile. The circle, on the other hand, is immovable." And in the chapter Statics and Dynamics, Klee demanded that the dynamic design rules should avoid static rules such as pronounced verticals, horizontals, or diagonals. This is followed by geometric drawings of moving and still squares and triangles. That's maybe a bit complicated. I will try to explain what he intended to say with these drawings. So if you have this baseline here, and you have parallel to it, you have the baseline of the square. So in Klee thinking, the square here is fixed, is unmoved, whereas the triangle is free because it's not bound to this baseline. And that's similar to this line here, where you have nor the triangle nor the square are based to the or are parallel to this baseline. That means they are both free. And in this with this baseline, you have it. This baseline is parallel to one of the lines of the triangle. That means the triangle is fixed, but the square is not parallel to this baseline. The square is free. So that's quite a complicated basis of construction, I think, and it's a theory for planimetric design configuration, but he would also use similar things in some of his artworks. And even if I find it tricky, as I mentioned before, to compare teaching notes with artworks, there is obviously one parallel with these two works. The study sheet with moving figures from 1938, that means it's created more than 10 years after his teaching time at the Bauhaus. He clearly refers to these sketches made in the pictorial configuration. Please apologize. Yeah. Yeah. Before I come to an end now, I would like to point out that for Klee, art and teaching do not necessarily have anything to do with each other. Paul Klee's notes and drawings in the theory of pictorial configuration are not sketches for the artworks. However, it cannot be denied that he painted works in preparation for the lessons with which he tried to grasp the theoretical content for himself. But the lessons often were much more technical and factual. Klee expressly pointed out to the students that although artists like to work sine ratio freely, school examples must be rationally comprehensible. And Klee was a formative figure at the Bauhaus. And when he left Dessau in 1931, Vasily Kandinsky wrote in the Bauhaus magazine, this quote you see here on the screen, Klee spread a healthy, fertilizing atmosphere at the Bauhaus. As a great artist and as a clear, pure human being, the Bauhaus appreciates it. And one of his students wrote in the same issue that Klee was a teacher who, quote again, like a magician, made the unreal real, the irrational rational, end quote, with his gaze, words, and gestures. And he continued, we learned to see the primary design of the surface was not a matter of the simplest consideration, but of the deepest experience. Paul Klee's creator was to show the path to create creative work. He did not claim that his teaching was the only correct one. And at the end of the semester, he said to have once said, quote again, I have shown you one path here. I myself have taken a different one. And this different way of creating, you can experience in many of his works, where the process mostly is more important than the end form. Even in some drawings where he seems to tell stories with this nice work of a family walk from 1930. Yeah, thank you. That was my presentation. And Mira, thank you.
Thank you so much, Marianne. That was absolutely amazing. I have noted down a lot of questions I already have. Thank you so much. Before we're going to dive into that, let's have for everybody just like a quick 5-minute break, chance to get water, go to the bathroom. And so we're going to be back here in about 5 minutes time. Everyone, and welcome back. So we're going to continue now with the discussion. And I would like to ask Karen, who really, I'm happy that she joins the discussion now, to maybe open with a comment. I have to say that now I can see everybody, so I can't see spotlights right now, so maybe we could change that. That would be great before we begin. Just checking in if is this working for everybody? I can now see only Marianne spotlighted. Is this the same for you, Raju and Karen, or is it different for you? It's the same, right?
It's the same.
Sorry for slight technical issues, but this is bound to happen always. Can I ask Sripat, our tech support, maybe to just unmute and tell us what to do?
So the one is open up and participants can put together one picture.
I cannot understand you, Sripat. I'm sorry. Okay, then let's just continue like this now, for now. Okay. Anyways, with all of us visible, Karen, may I ask you maybe to just open, with a comment or question, the discussion?
Sure. So I want to thank Mira, of course, and also Raju and Mariana for two very fascinating presentations. One of the things that struck me in thinking about how to sort of pull them together is just that I think it's good for us to just consider the manner in which both of these artists are attempting to change where people are asking questions about art, what it means, and how it works. So it's generally, if you're thinking about what the possibilities are as an artist, you know, when you open a drawing pad or what have you. For both Barwe and Klee, it's very clear that they want to ask their questions not in terms of how can I draw well, or how can I paint realistically, or how can I, you know, create a pleasing image, and instead to think about, you know, what are the elements of art? How is art a form of thought? How does art become a meeting point for nature and human action that's both part of nature and somehow not part of nature, right? Does it make sense? Both a form of movement, but an intentional form of movement. And, you know, so these types of questions are, I think, one of the first big steps that you have to take with both these figures is to recognize that they're asking questions that they view as being really elemental, like meaning that these are the elements of art, not what they would consider to be really inessential questions of, you know, when you paint a glass, what does it mean to do so, and is it a form of trickery and mastery, right? So I was really struck by the fact that one of the works that you showed, Raju, was Barwe painting a water glass, which is like not what you'd think he would do, because that's a standard sort of, you know, art as magic. Art is the magic of representation. You know, can you create something that's translucent and reproduce the way that water and glass refract light, right? Does it make sense? Like that's what that would be. And so it's interesting that he was playing with that almost as a joke. You know, this is not the kind of question I ask as an artist. Okay, so that's, I wanted to sort of seat the discussion sort of at that place rather than at these other options that that many other artists have conversations about. There's nothing wrong with them, with those conversations, but that's just not the conversations that either Barwe or Klee are interested in having. Okay, so that's one sort of big thing. And so the question, once you get there, then you get the fact that both of these artists seem to be really interested in paradox, or in something that is both possible and impossible at the same time. And again, Raju, this is thinking about the idea of no form as being an idea that is fundamentally undoable. I mean, it's not possible in the world to have a total lack of form. So the question is, you know, what sorts of forms allow you to access no form, right? And that's where Tantra comes in, etc. And then there's the other way that I think is interesting is to think, and this is where I want to ask you to react, actually, because that was me kind of more or less restating where you guys put the ground. But I'm interested in two things that I noticed that really sort of go against this whole sort of elemental kinds of discussion. One is, Raju, so many of the works that you showed us were made in the very last few years of Barwe's life. And that introduces a very different idea of experience than the one that he seemed to want to talk about, right? You know, the experience of aging, of limited mobility, of, you know, of what have you, of just, you know, what it is to be an older person, and to not be in the stage where you're figuring things out so much as to be in the stage where you have already done what you're doing before. So the question is, why are you still doing it, or why are you doing it in a different way, etc. So I wanted to ask you to react to just basically the idea, like, what is it to look at Barwe's from the 1993, 1994? Okay, so that's one. And then Mariana, I was really struck by the idea of Klee entering a classroom backwards and then showing his back to the students while speaking toward a blackboard. And that is hilarious. First of all, it's just very funny on the face of it. And then secondly, it makes you wonder what it is to have a teacher who expects you to do so much of the work yourself. So that, I think, is, we think about both Barwe and Klee as consummate teachers. But I'm sorry, I would get fired if or I would have done before tenure, gotten fired if I went into a classroom and showed my back to the students. That would not be acceptable in today's world. And so the question is, what are the expectations of learning? And how might that allow us to get at this question of influence that you brought up, Mira, in a different way? So, okay, so those are my sort of initial comments. And but Raju, do you want to talk about Barwe as an old man? And Mariana, do you want to talk about what it is to be Klee's student when he offers you his back?
Yeah, so Barwe actually, like Paul Klee died at the age of 60. Barwe also died at the age of 59. He was not so very old at that time. But he was always contemplating on the idea, and like I always say, what happens when you read Barwe or Paul Klee? It's basically the idea of having to see something, some questions which are similar to you while you're entering into in the field of art, into the area of art, or while you're a student. You're having these questions. You're always inquisitive about things, small little fundamental things, the philosophy, the surrounding, the culture, the politics, everything. So here we find these artists who are talking about the same questions. And I always say that this is not something about the biographies we read, which always tell you that either these artists are the prodigies or they have something in the past life and they are so big from the very beginning. So in case of Barwe or in case of Paul Klee, it's not the same thing. It's the questions they have, which are completely relatable to any practicing artist, if he is seriously pursuing that. So the things which I have shown is from the collection, but we fortunately only got his later works, and we are also looking for his early works also. But I think there is a thread which is always there about the form and no form what we are talking about. But it's only, I think, the approach, the techniques which he has explored throughout, also the materials. But the basic idea of his was entering into the space and stripping the identities of these objects, to strip the identity of this object and reconstruct, replace those in the inner space where this question about the space is arising, whether it's an internal space or the external space, or it's a mental space or it's a spiritual space. So these are the questions which he is trying to address, and I think it becomes simplifying. He started simplifying later with his lines and pastels and smaller little things, and I think that that is completely distinctly uh, showing in his later work, the simplification of the whole thing. I think that I think has started much earlier also. His drawings from the diary uh, is very simple. So I can't say that it is showing the older age or anything of that sort. But the simplification, yes, it's a distinct simplification we can see in his later works.
Yeah, I also it was so funny knowing how Paul Klee would enter the teaching room, and I mean, I can hardly imagine how students would react to this way of teaching. But I think you have to consider the time when he started teaching. So it was in 1921, 3 years after the end of the First World War. Germany was in a big chaos, nothing worked. And we had the founder of the Bauhaus, Walter Gropius, who had this idea of a school very similar to the medieval Bauhütten, like this construction sites where artists and craftsmen would build together the cathedral, churches, and everything. That was his idea. But the students, they were very young. I think they were, I don't know, 17, 18, came out of a country that had lost the war. So they had their whole or part of their childhood was in the war. So they had little experience. As far as we know, and there are not many sources about this founding time, it was really great chaos. So they just were there and they attended classes. They were apparently very eager to learn from all their students. I mean, Paul Klee had in his first composition practicum, I think he had more than 40 students. So it was overcrowded. And yeah, and for himself, he had never taught before. So he really, I have the impression he tried to do it as he had been taught back during his school time, with this very frontal teaching kind of thing, where his teachers would read everything and then make these drawings on the blackboard. I think that's the way he thought teaching has to be. And it's still hard to understand how he really would didactically teach all that planimetric and stereometric configuration. So that's quite the thing we don't know. We have notes from students, so we know that he did teach it, and but how you do that? Well, for me, it's still a bit a wonder, a miracle. And what you also have to keep in mind, talking about Paul Klee's teaching thing, is that it wasn't an art school. It was a school of design. And I think that's a big difference from, but that's maybe to you, Raju, to answer this question, being as an artist, and to Mira as well, being artists. It's different whether you think about learning how to develop forms or do things that has to end like in craftsmanship works in a way, or later in building, in architecture. I think that makes a difference. But that I, for myself, I've never heard before I started working on Paul Klee, that you can experience a square or a triangle as a dynamic form. So for me, before, it was always static, and I think that's the interesting thing, that he realized to transfer his artistic ideas into this design teaching things. And apparently, he was very, as Kandinsky said, Klee was a formative personality at the Bauhaus. So. Yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, Karin.
Oh, it's fine. So, I mean, I think you find an interesting movement across in thinking about the Weavers Service Center in India, and the manner in which that brought art school trained artists who were engaged really in a different social section of Indian art, right? Meaning it was more like a different social milieu than anything else, and bringing this group of people into a sort of situation of design, and that was, you know, a very deliberate, very deliberately molded upon the Bauhaus idea of the relationship between art and design. So that, I mean, that's a situation in which Indian pedagogues and arts administrators looked to the Bauhaus and said, this is actually something that could help us recover from colonial rule and build out craft into an industry that would serve the needs of the Indian people. And so that portion of Barwe's life is repeated throughout this whole generation of modernist artists, and it's really a very important sort of moment of reconfiguring what art is for, and how it can contribute to society, right? So that's actually what's interesting is the context that you sketched out as the Bauhaus is actually not. That's a real point of comparison, because that sense of immediacy and the need to solve problems, to the need to actually build things in the world, that is absolutely common to the sort of the role of the Indian artist in the 1960s and 1970s. Right, Raju, I see you nodding. Is there anything? Do you want to talk more about that portion of what Barwe was doing?
So I think we cannot really draw parallels between Bauhaus and Weaver Center, because I think the idea of Weaver Center started by the great lady Pupul Jaikar, who had this thought about integrating every field of craft and art together, which is actually the initial days of Indian independence. After independence, we were always finding the idea of identity. And of course, the decolonization was one of the main focuses, and we were trying to reconnect with the roots. And like I always say, it's the idea of uh, uh, the Western information coming together in a packet, and not a linear thing. Everything came together, and it actually had a lot of questions: how to deal with the things which are rapidly coming as a modern society, and which are the things which are still being practiced in people in villages. The motif, the designs, every motif and the design in the textile has its own meaning and tradition and a geographical identity, and those are the things which the modern artists or artists from the art school who were appointed as designers in Weaver Center were trying to integrate those ideas. And I think the idea of stripping the identity from the modernist was also a little bit implied on those crafts, and they tried to infuse these spaces, the dealing with spaces which the art school got in the teaching, and dealing of the spaces which the traditional craft was having. So I think there are totally different ways of Bauhaus and what happens in Weaver Center or probably NID. They had completely different approaches, but I think the aim was very similar to solve the problem, but not the immediate ones.
Yes, perhaps. Okay, so I wanted to ask a little bit of a geeky question about the difference between color and arrows, which is really the role of symbols in Klee's work. And when you guys presented the work, I was really interested in looking at Barwe's handling of things, of material things, and whether material things like, like the bottles, didn't you show one where bottles were falling off a table? And whether there was for Klee, whether in the works that you show us, which are really sort of focused on this question of movement, or in others of Klee's works, whether there is a sense of things, or whether there's only like abstract laws of geometry and color, and then symbols that have been recently agreed upon by cultures, right? So I thought it was a really interesting distinction between the relationship between purple and yellow, which appears to be transhistorical, like just real, natural, and his dismissal of the arrow as something that we've just agreed upon recently. So, it's much less real than the color wheel, right? Does it make sense? And then in Barwe, I think he is playing very deftly with the question of, what's a symbol, what's a thing, what are these shapes that look like rocks? What is the shape of the human head? Is that a human head, or is that a shape like a triangle and a circly thing and a line, and so I'm interested in thinking about sort of the status of signs in both of these artists' work. That makes sense. I know, super geeky, very technical. So
Okay, I will try to to answer your not so easy question. Yeah, it's with the arrow, that's not as simple as I pointed it out now in the presentation, because his aim was that it should be possible to show in an artwork a movement without making arrows. So mainly by using colors. Let's say you have a dark background and there is one single point where you put some lighter color in, and then you get brighter and brighter, and that shows the direction of the movement. That was the theory, which was obviously not always what he was interested in his work. And, when he used the arrows and other symbols, then he was very often really funny. And I think he even made kind of a joke of himself, because it was so obvious. You see the movement in certain words. You see how it would go and how you have to read it. And then he emphasized it with an arrow, which doesn't make sense. So it's like inverting his whole theory in his own artistic work. And that's quite an interesting approach. And yeah, with like symbols or forms or other things, it's not, he hardly ever would paint, I think, or draw some very clear forms or symbols or objects. So like that. I think that's not something he was very interested in. It's also because he was mainly drawing and working with watercolor, so it's not like copying things from the outside world. That's not what he was interested in.
Yeah, talking about Barwe's form, I think, like I mentioned before, that once we had a discussion about the abstraction, and he was having this idea. So why the idea of abstraction should be concrete? It should be always abstract. So, like his contemporaries, he didn't opt it to be a pure abstract artist. He always wanted to see things in a different way, in an abstract way. But he also never wanted to erase its identity completely. So it's basically his direction, his thinking, his thought going towards the abstraction was kind of captured in his work. So the form which may have a primary identity and which is going towards something else, or a form which is very abstract and seeking some form, some identical form. This is the transition of this idea. I think he was hooked to that thing, which in between, it's not, and he was in person like that. He was a very, he always used to be very moderate in his ideas and thoughts. He was never extreme in anything. So he never got things which are pure pain, figurative or pure abstract. He always believed in this transition. And like what Paul Klee was always saying, it's about the forming. He believed in that. So sometimes his forms are formed, and sometimes his form were definite and deformed later on. So we are seeing these two things uh, morphed together in many of his works. Yeah.
Yeah.
Raju,
I think it answers.
may I add
Yeah,
a quote? Is that okay from
yeah,
the Cora canvas from the book? Because I happen to have that,
yeah,
and I thought maybe it's related to Karen's question as well, where he talks about the relationship of form and space, and says, if their context changes, I'm quoting now, form transforms into space, and it doesn't take long for space to become form. In this sense, both space and form are profound mysteries. The boundaries of space itself are a form, and the being or meaning within form is space. It becomes a bit complicated with all the back and forth. But I thought with this back and forth, it might be nice. And he actually concludes this by saying, actually, form and space are completely merged into each other. The fact that they are separated from each other for a time and thus cancelled out is a phenomenon that we call drawing or painting. So in a way, it seems like drawing or painting itself is the moment where we actually have this illusion. And he even says then, in this respect, drawing or painting is an illusion. And I thought that might be fitting to add to this discussion. And Karen, is it okay if I bring in a question from the audience, which I thought might be also fitting in this moment as we talk about symbol, space, form, that back and forth in both Klee's and Barwe's works. Joce Pritzky, who is actually going to be part of the next webinar in December, put a question to the chat saying, first of all, thanks for sharing your knowledge and thoughts to all of you. And she has a question and would be interested in all of you to react to it, if possible. I'm quoting, "I've realized that the word spirituality has been avoided. We can understand the search of both artists for form or no form. Can we understand the search of both artists for form or no form as a spiritual, in quotation marks, practice? If so, what does it mean for global modernisms, or maybe on a smaller scale for this Klee and Barwe connection, if we reconnect the search for form to spirituality?" And you also added here that using spirituality that word is maybe lack for using another word or a better word for it. So yeah, how do we bring form and spiritual and practice back into this, or does it make sense? How do we do that? Thank you for the question.
yeah. Thanks for the question. We are not trying to avoid the word spirituality. It's a very loaded word. There are so many things loaded on these words. But when I talked about the Bhakti movement in India between 7th and 17th century, and the idea of form, formless, and the duality, it's all spirituality in a way. So of course, Barwe sir was very much asking these questions, but the problem today is spirituality is a very slippery word. It goes towards the religious aspects as well. And if you talk about, like I just talked about the quantum physics, which is also saying the same thing. So we cannot say that's the spirituality. I don't know. It's a parallel reality or the hyper reality, but it is more like a same thing, and which comes in any Indian conversation. The word spirituality in the context of it, it always there.
And how did Barwe see that, Raju? How was that for him?
So that's what I've been trying to tell, that the idea of duality, which is there in Indian philosophy, is about the spirituality, and the duality is you being a body, and you are also the world. This idea of duality is always questioned and always talked about in Indian philosophy, and this is exactly what he's trying to do with his objects and his space and his canvas, and that's I think it's an ongoing quest he is into, and it's a very parallel thing. I don't think it is separate from his thought.
And just to add to that, this is the distinction that I think is important in thinking about whether there may be laws or elements or sort of the physical nature of art that goes beyond time and space. Because when you think of the category of spiritual, there's a number of ways of thinking about it. One is thinking about the difference between the temporal and the transcendent, or the immanent and the transcendent, that which is sort of in the earth and concrete, and that which transcends, which is informed by sort of things that go beyond the human nature, right? Not human nature, but human knowledge, sorry. That I think is one sort of way of thinking about the relationship between the spiritual and everything else. I do think also that you have the idea of the spiritual as the thing that underlies religion, and religion as a social and as a divisive force against the spiritual, which is a unifying and sort of beyond human culture type of force, as a sort of desire, a utopian desire, really, for something that might bind nature together, right? Not human nature, but nature together. I think that is, I'm thinking about Mariana's very dramatic sort of, painting a word picture of life in Germany in 1921, right? As what that might have been like. And there was another program that I was part of with the Bauhaus that talked about Bauhaus puppet shows, where the Bauhaus students would take puppets out and they would do puppet shows in the German countryside in exchange for potatoes, because they didn't have enough to eat. Yeah. And so, yeah, which is not what one normally thinks of as being the grounds of art practice, though perhaps one should. Okay, so that's, yeah. Anyway, Mariana, do you have stuff you want to add as well?
Yeah.
Yes, yeah, I think what Claire never mentioned, or I can't remember, that spirituality, I think it was as a word or as a concept, it wasn't that important for him. But I think he used it in a different way, because he was very aware as an artist that everything around him, above him, below him, besides him, it has some, I wouldn't say influence, but he takes all this inspiration, and then he kind of digests it, and then he can he can spread it through his art. And I think that is kind of a spirituality, a concept he uses without naming it, probably. That's my interpretation. Yeah.
Thank you, all of you, for responding to that. And I maybe just wanted to add, though that might open up too big of a box, but what we have been talking about preparing this webinar. So we had some pre-chats about this, and actually this question of spirituality came up, in the sense also what I think, when I understood this correctly, Karen, also you have been working about and trying to really, I think when we talk about spirituality, which I think makes sense with these artists, as you just all have responded to, of course, then it makes complete sense to do that. But also to be careful, like, because there's so many different things that could mean and so many things that are inside of that. So is it about the divine? Is it a sense of genesis in nature, which I think Klee often mentioned in that respect as well? Are we talking about transcendence? Is that different to a spiritual practice as a religious practice? And so I think there are many aspects here where I also feel it's maybe not the time now, but it would be really nice to consider this and think more about how did Klee and Barwe in their respective countries and that time that they were working in, also in their way of relating to spirituality, wanted to be independent maybe from things that were going already around them, as established religions or states, and how the state and the government was related to religion or not. So how did the artists themselves make use of practices in order to belong to something, or maybe also separate them from something? I'm saying this really abstractly, but I feel like there's a nice tension here between, I feel, or maybe movement, to pick up the theme of this webinar, between actually working on something that's quite divine and looks into the laws of being almost, but then also believes in a back and forth and never quite defining what of it is form and what can be formed, and at the same time also teaching it, or maybe not teaching it, but making it somehow tangible in all these different pathways and discussions to students. So it's like mysterious, demystified at the same time. And I think, I guess spirituality, in my understanding now after talking to all of you, sits somewhere in that relationship as well. I'm going to read some questions that were posted in the chat, so I'm going to take a moment if you have any more to say to that. Oh, actually, I'm okay. I'm going to look at the questions from the audience, and there's one question I can answer very quickly and easily, and not quite in the way I would like to, which is about if there are any books and articles available online as an open access about the works and philosophy of Barwe for beginners, for further readings. And I mean, I have to say that one of the reasons that we are engaging in this project, and I feel like also Raju, who had this initial idea for this project, also came up with the idea, is that there isn't much out there, sadly, about Barwe yet. So as I mentioned at the beginning, some of these writings of Barwe have been translated into German, but we are also working on maybe translating it into English. We will see, and that will be published in a few weeks' time online. And same with Klee's writings that are already available online, as Marianne has mentioned. And that will be accompanied by introductions into both artists' work and life as well. So there will be some resources that we are building up over the next weeks, but also the whole next year. Raju is planning a whole podcast series that will talk to different artists and students and colleagues of Barwe to give more insight. So maybe less articles and books in that sense, but there will be a lot available on our website, hopefully growing into a little archive. So stay tuned for that. But it's a very good question, because yes, it's also a bit of a groundwork to talk more about his work, which is way less known and researched than Klee's work. And I'm just going to another question here about music. Music played a major part in Klee's expression. And it says here that Barwe was very staunch in his religious beliefs, The personal inhibitions of both these artists may have entered subconsciously in their works. Both were very passionate about defining the grammar of visual art and design without referencing their personal convictions, and their writings along with their works have always been a leading light for all of us. Thank you. So this is a comment from one of our listeners here today. Thank you very much for that. And there's one more question. Maybe this could be the last question for today, and it goes to Karen. Is it that the practice of Barwe and Klee is a repudiation of the duality between the immanent and the transcendent? That the process of abstraction is the movement between the material and the spiritual? Thank you for the question. That links in well to our discussion.
I think I deserve that question, which is, if possible, harder than the one that I asked. So thank you for attempting to stump the stumper. Okay, so can you read it one more time, Mira?
Absolutely, of course. Is it that the practice of Barwe and Klee is a repudiation of the duality between the immanent and the transcendent? That the process of abstraction is the movement between the material and the spiritual?
Right. So I actually think that Klee and Barwe are really different on these points, and that they're engaging the similar questions quite differently, and in ways that I think are appropriate to their time and to what other people had done. I mean, Klee, it appears like I wanted to ask Mariana about this. I mean, I think that the opposition that she showed between the two grids of color, and the difference between that which is separated by black lines by a grid and that which is kind of bleeding into one another and is very clearly pigment, which of course is pigment being a kind of substitute for a pure color that is in light, right? Does it make sense? So you think of pigment as always a kind of concretized form of the light spectrum, that is itself an answer to the question, right? Does it make sense? So like in that moment of the hand-painted grid, I think Klee is engaging the relationship between that which is concrete and that which is abstract, that which is phenomenal and that which is epiphenomenal, you know, beyond phenomenon, that which is immanent, that which is transcendent. But it worries me then, or it's okay. He eventually perhaps he wanted to move on and just say, I'm going to focus more on color relation by having this grid that doesn't bleed together, that de-emphasizes pigment, that emphasizes instead the abstraction. I think for like the way that you told the story, Mariana, was a move towards a kind of more and more purity of sort of thinking about color, right? So that's one. Whereas Barwe, I think, really wanted to hold these things in suspension all the time. And that for him, that was the point. The point was that there is transcendence and immanence and transcendence, right? That is really the kind of point of thinking about these questions to begin with. So I don't know if that makes sense as an answer, but I hope it does.
Thank you. I think it makes a lot of sense. Thank you very much. I don't know, Mariana, Raju, do you have any more to add to that? So to that question of, for Mariana, maybe also did Klee actually say, okay, I'm going against this whole idea of duality between something that's immanent and something that's transcendent? And same to Barwe, to Barwe, sorry, yeah, hope that would be nice. To Raju about how Barwe was thinking about it. Do you want to add anything maybe?
Yeah, I think the idea of amurta, which we were talking today, no form, is also coming from the idea of spirituality. What is beyond the bodies? What is beyond everything you see? There is something else. So this is the idea. The entire idea of amurta is coming from the basis of spirituality and the duality. So it goes very well with the idea of what he was trying to answer. Yeah, I think that's one addition which I wanted to.
Thank you. Yeah.
Well, it's not so an easy question. I don't think that Klee would divide it or separate it in a way. So for him, it was all together in a way. And concerning the grids, Karin, I have the impression that the later one with the black lines, that was very much forced by this new direction of the Bauhaus, where functionalism architecture was so strong. And we know that he didn't feel at ease with these kinds of, where the school was going to. So it could also be kind of an ironic comment on this new direction. So,
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much for that. I have the feeling this is maybe a nice moment to end, unless there's, yeah, great. Any more questions from our speakers? No. Okay. So maybe this is, yeah, a good moment, and we could go, you know, on with this forever. We also said in preparing this that we're probably not going to really answer any questions, but rather keep them floating, keep them coming. So thank you all so much. Thank you to Marianne, to Karen, to Raju for presenting, for speaking and discussing. Thank you to everybody listening and giving your questions as well, and for engaging. I'm going to have a little more list of thank yous. A very huge thank you also goes to Shripad and his team, who has been helping us with the tech and preparing everything. It wouldn't be possible without you, and it would also not be possible without all the partners, the Goethe-Institut. So we don't have a member of the Goethe-Institut in the panel, but I know that they're somewhere around in listening. So thank you very much to the Zaposa Museum, to Zentrum Paul Klee. Thank you very much for making this happen. And yeah, if you want to know more, you can visit a website. Shripad, if we could maybe already share that last slide, because there you can, thank you so much, can just see how you get there. So basically, if you go to the website of the Goethe-Institut Pune and then to current projects, you're going to find this exhibition project, where also you're going to have announcement of events that are going to happen. And especially for the webinar series, there is a next event very concretely only in a few weeks' time on the 7th of December, where Rebecca Brown, art historian, will grant us with an introduction keynote about global modernism. And she will be joined by Jutsi Pritzky for the discussion. You has also already given us a great question today. And the link for that is on the website. You actually don't need to book anymore. The direct link is just there. So yeah, and more of the webinars are coming next year. So if you're interested, stay tuned. And that's it for today. Thank you again very much. And I wish you a nice rest of your Saturday, which might be very long or a little bit shorter, depending on where you are at the moment. Thank you.